as professionals, we come in as personal people, not just professional people, right? And we bring all of our personal experience, our baggage, our talent, our connection, our engagement. And if that person, if those people, those professionals are fully in the room as people, then we invite the full parties into the room too. And in that way, I think there's real opportunity for transformation.
The Center for Understanding and Conflict welcomes you to The Other Chair, a monthly podcast exploring the dynamics of conflict and how to bring the human issues to the table. Together with our guests, we explore how the power of understanding each other can lead to better solutions for people on both sides of an issue. We will also share tips for managing your own mediation practice, approaching conflict in the professional world, and ways to apply our understanding-based model in your personal life.
Hello to our listeners, and welcome back to The Other Chair. Today we are exploring one of the most personal and challenging forms of conflict many people face, divorce, and how it can be approached with greater understanding, clarity, and compassion. Our guest today is Katherine E. Miller, attorney, mediator, and senior trainer with the Center for Understanding and Conflict. She's also the author of The Emotionally Savvy Divorce, a grounded and compassionate guide that invites readers to see conflict not as something to avoid or win, but as a source of insight and a potential path toward healing. In this episode, Katherine shares what she has learned from decades of working with couples, how the understanding-based model applies in divorce mediation, and what conflict professionals can do better to support people through this life transition. Hello, Katherine, and welcome back to The Other Chair.
Hey, James, thanks for having me.
Always a pleasure to have you, and especially now, it's a very exciting time. Not only are we here today to talk about matrimonial mediation, but also you just released a book on the topic, which is wonderful. So let's start there. Tell me a little bit more, or tell our listeners a little bit more about your book, The Emotionally Savvy Divorce, and what inspired you to write it at this point in your career.
Yeah, I was inspired to write the book by a client who said to me, oh, many years ago, Katherine, she said, you really need to write a book. And I was like, I do? What? Why? And she said, well, I think the way that you work with people going through this is really special and unique. And I said, well, I'm going to need help then. And she said, I'm going to get you help. She was really serious that she wanted me to write this book. And so over that, and she did, she found me somebody to help me think it through and craft it. And I started and stopped writing this book 3 times before I really got through this one. And so what would happen is I'd start and I would get into the middle of the book and I'd say, you know what, to myself, this book is really no different than any other book written by any other divorce lawyer about divorce. And I'm not interested in writing that book. That is not the book that Jenny wanted me to write. Or I would get into the middle of the book and I would think, I'm really writing a book for lawyers here, and I don't want to write a book for lawyers. I want to write a book for people who are going through this. Or I would get into the middle of the book and I'd think, well, you know what? I can't figure out a way to connect the beginning of this book to the end that I want to go to. And it was only when I came up with this idea of what to do with your feelings as you go through the divorce process, to work with your feelings in a way that would actually help you, that I got really inspired. And then I thought to myself, that is the book that Jenny wanted me to write. And so I combined that, how to work with your feelings, which I think is very in alignment with the understanding-based model and the feelings of the other person. And also how to put that into a strategy that helps people work through the conflict and not just try to work around it or power through it or do some other way of getting to the end of the negotiation that doesn't really help them. And so those 2 things really were inspiring to me and I thought would really help people like my client who asked me to write the book in the first place.
As you mentioned, your book brings together the emotional dimension of divorce, but also focuses on the practical dimension as well. And why is it so important to address both rather than just focusing on the feeling aspect?
Yeah, well, I mean, for one thing, the feeling aspect, excuse me, I have a podcast too, Divorce Dialogues, and I have interviewed dozens of divorce coaches who say that they tell their clients that they should set their feelings aside and treat the divorce like a business deal. And James, that is just bad advice. And the reason it's bad advice is really 2 reasons. One is that it turns out that we actually make decisions in the emotional part of our brain. So all decisions, whether or not we're going to put on the pink socks or the blue socks or tie the left shoe or the right shoe or what to have for dinner, these are all emotional decisions. So the idea that we're making non-emotional decisions is just not how it works. And two, aren't business decisions really emotional decisions? They are. A lot of when I think about sort of scary things I've done in my life, none of the things that come to mind are actually physically scary things. They're all business things. I rented this office. I hired this associate. I spent this money on this course. Or, these kinds of things. These are things that were really emotional for me. So I really wanted to be able to help people think about how to use those feelings to uncover their core values, their priorities, their North Star, the things that really were most meaningful for them so that they could negotiate based on those things rather than on external things that other people might think were important or that just might look good or look bad. So that's one piece. But the other piece is then, sorry, so once you sorted that out, then how do you present that to get to an outcome that actually meets the needs that you have? And so what I did was I adapted a lot of business negotiation strategies to divorce and help people think of different ways that they can think about the divorce process in the context of a negotiation, because the divorce is a negotiation and it's very likely to be resolved in negotiation and not by a judge. Nationwide, 95% of divorces settle before a judge makes a decision after a trial. So even though that's not how we think about it, sort of in the vernacular and the culture, that is actually, practically speaking, how these decisions are made by the people getting divorced themselves with the support of their attorneys, maybe with the support of a mediator or a mental health professional, but not by a judge making a decision for them. So it's really crucial to understand how negotiation works. But there is one thing about divorce negotiation that's really different than most negotiations. In most negotiations, and we think about buying a house, buying a car, negotiating a job situation, these are the kinds of things we think about normally. What are negotiations? We could walk away from that car, that house, that job, and buy another house, another car, hire another job, get hired in another job or hire another employee. But in divorce, much as people would like to be divorcing someone other than who they are married to, they cannot. And so divorce is really more along the lines of international relations. When you think about the emotional piece of it, how stuck people are, you can't be next to a different country than you're next to physically in geography. You're married to the person you're married to. And if you want to be unmarried from that person, you have to deal with that person.
And as you invite readers to see this conflict as a potential source of insight, what does that look like in the context of divorce where these emotions run so deep and may not always be rational to the other side? I'd say diplomatically, it's just a much more, or can be a much more fierce approach depending on the circumstances. And so maybe tell us a little bit more about how that works in practice.
Yeah. Well, a lot of what I'm about to say really does come from the understanding based model. And that is the most important thing for someone to do early on, once they reach a place of physical safety, financial safety, for the short term, like a plateau where they're okay and they can start thinking about the things that are most important to them. The most important thing for them to do first is to understand themselves and to really think about why they're having the reactions that they're why the things that they think that they want are things that they want. And so what I think about that is that when we have a problem and we're thinking, oh my gosh, this problem makes me anxious, we cast around in our mind for something that will make us feel better. Right. So if I'm worried about where I'm going to live, or I'm worried about the impact of the divorce on my children, and I feel really deep pain about that. I think to myself, well, I feel really deep pain about how I'm disrupting my children. What's something that could make me feel like it wasn't so bad for the kids? I know what it is. I'll stay in the house with the kids, right? So I latch onto that idea because the idea makes me feel less anxious than I was already feeling, right? And so I hold on to that thing. I'm going to stay in the house and I can fight to the death for staying in the house because I'm worried about how bad I feel about disrupting the lives of my children, whether or not it's my decision or my spouse's decision or a joint decision. So there we have, okay, if you can ask yourself, why is it that I'm so attached to the idea of staying in the house? Those are the kinds of things, even though it makes you lean back into your anxiety. And James, I just want you to know, and I want the listeners to know, that I was in my 40s before I realized that anxiety wasn't going to kill me. And I'm really not kidding. I do not like to feel anxious. I would challenge all the listeners to raise your hand if you like feeling anxious. None of us do. None of us like it. So it really requires you to think back into, if I didn't have the house, what would that mean? Oh my God, now I'm back into, I'm a bad parent. My children are going to be hurt. They're going to be heartbroken. Their lives are going to be blown out of the water. So thinking into what it is that's going on for me first is incredibly powerful in thinking about what it is in the situation that we face. And now from that place, you can think, well, what might be going on for my ex, right? Or what might be going on for that person that they're saying, doing, or acting the way that they're doing in those such painful ways? Is there something that I can recognize in the person that I once loved and in what it is that they're doing? And can I align with even one tiny little thing about and can we then approach this conversation, even if I don't tell him or her, if I can approach the conversation from that place of generosity, that it's not they're trying to hurt me, it's they're trying to save themselves. And they are also anxious. They are also scared. And they're also holding on to something for a reason that solves a real problem for them.
Conflict manifests itself in many ways in our personal lives, for professionals in the workplace and for practitioners who have made a career bringing together parties in conflict through mediation practice. Each month, the Center for Understanding in Conflict hosts live webinars with featured guests discussing best practices and sharing their experiences for tackling conflict using the understanding-based model.
In this understanding based approach that you've described, or heavily inspired by the understanding based approach, how does this differ from traditional or more traditional divorce processes?
Yeah. Well, it asks the question why. And I want to make sure that the listeners understand that the question why can be sounded like a challenge, like why? Why is that important? But that's not what I mean. If we invite the inquiry as to what it is that's important for the person. One of the things that I've been doing for a long time, even before there were cell phones, is talking out loud to myself. I love to do this in the car. And sometimes if I'm driving by myself and I'm really worried about something, sometimes I say out loud to myself, hey, Catherine, what's up with that? Why do you feel so anxious about that? What are you worried about? Why did that hurt your feelings so much? And I think that those questions of really approaching the 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 question or the problem from the purposes of my own internal reaction and emotions is really different than saying, so use my earlier example. Instead of asking what it is that's important for the house about the house, like traditionally we just argue for the house, right? Or not for the house, or for whatever the thing is that is the solution. And the problem with that is that that those things that the parties cast around in their minds to solve a problem might solve the problem, but it might not solve the problem. So traditional negotiation is all about $5 more, $10 less, and back and forth on the what is really the symptoms of the negotiation, like the pieces out there, and isn't necessarily all that aligned with the priorities of the people involved. And a lot of compromise is involved then in those negotiations and a lot of bad feeling, right? And in the book I talk about ways to open up the paradigm of the negotiation so it's not a zero sum game, so that we can include the full holistic approach of the problem that the divorcing couple faces. But honestly, this approach works in business, it works in all kinds of pretty much every negotiation is a larger discussion than just $5 more or $5 less.
Divorce can be highly emotional and reactive before approaching it in using the understanding based approach. And so, as you ask and work with couples and can encourage them to think about the why and how the other person is feeling, I have to imagine that those emotions are being asked to come forward and be dealt with at the front of things. And so, how do you support couples in staying engaged with each other during this process in a constructive way?
Yeah, that's a good question because I think a lot of times when we think about emotion, we think about overwhelming emotion, right? You want to keep the emotions out of it and treat this like a business deal because you don't want to be overwhelmed by your emotions and then you're just screaming at each other. You never love me. You don't care. How could you say that? How could you suggest that? Like that is not what I'm suggesting at all. What I'm suggesting is that each person do the work to understand why they're coming from where they're coming from. And this, like, what's up with that, Catherine? Question that I ask myself. Like, really think that through. I don't think that in most cases, screaming and yelling for a particularly long period of time is that useful. And yeah, there's that risk. But those sort of deep hurt and deep pain emotions are there. They're there, whether or not we tap them or we don't tap them. And I think that it's much, and in my experience, not just that I think this, but in my experience is that if people can process those things, maybe with coaching or therapy or in a support group or even on their own with meditation or prayer, that they can sort them out enough to really figure out what they're coming from and the values that they're covering and the pain that they're maybe avoiding.
Have you seen or witnessed a common moment with the couples that you've worked with when they're able to move from blame and fear towards greater understanding using this approach? And if so, what has that been like for you? And what have you seen happen with that?
A number of years ago, I worked with a couple in mediation, and they came into mediation about 2 weeks after the wife had learned that the husband was having an affair, and he'd had an affair a number of years ago, and they'd patched it over, and so she was like, "I am totally done," and she was so angry, James, and the entire she cried and she screamed, and at the same time, she was really able to address his needs. It was really incredible, and I was really stunned at how she was able to have the emotion all out there, but also be so reasonable at the time. And there was a delay. So they signed their agreement, and then there was a delay of maybe 6 or 8 months before they came back in to sign the divorce papers. And so they came in together, and I I said, now that you're here in my office and we're signing these papers, I just want to tell you and reflect back that throughout the divorce process, you treated each other with, and she interrupted me. And I just want you to know, I was going to say, even though it was really difficult and emotional, you really treated each other with a lot of dignity and respect. But what she said was awfully. She said, she cut me up and she said, yeah, we treated each other awfully. And she burst into tears. And I said, actually, that's not what I was gonna say. I was gonna say that even though it was really hard and there was a lot of pain, you really did treat each other with dignity and respect. And I mean, even just telling you the story, like there are tears in my eyes, and I feel sort of this sort of goosebumps because of the power of that, James, is just so incredible when you're able to witness it.
Throughout the year, the Center for Understanding in Conflict hosts in-depth basic and advanced certificate programs designed to train you to become effective mediators and conflict resolution professionals centered in the understanding-based model. Our training programs have been the gold standard in alternative dispute resolution for 40 years and is popular within the legal community with human resource professionals, ombudsmen, and corporate workplace mediation clients.
The Emotionally Savvy Divorce, as I understand it, I appreciate you had shared a review copy earlier last month, I believe, is broadly accessible to a lot of different people, both those going through divorce and those working with individuals going through divorce. And so I'd like to shift the conversation a little bit from the individual to mediators and conflict professionals. For mediators working with couples in divorce, what are the most important mindsets or practices that you have time to speak about today to bring into the conflict?
Yeah, I think the mediation really gives the mediator the opportunity to bring some of the emotionally savvy principles into the room. I think that sometimes as professionals, we don't want to allow people to have their feelings in front of us. And sometimes we're afraid we won't know how to handle it. I often say to people, listen, have you ever spoken to a friend who was upset? Did you say, no, listen, I'm not a psychologist. I can't hear this, make it go away. No, I mean, people need to have a little bit of space to work through their feelings. And so to basically say, no, no, don't bring that in here, working through that, those sense of feelings and allows people to come to the word that came to mind was closure, but it's not really closure. It's a place of acceptance of where they are and where they need to go. And if they can do that together, that is a really like my couple that I was talking about, a powerful opportunity for them to work through the transition in their relationship from a married couple maybe to co-parents or people who are no longer married and to put some context and a narrative of not failure, but transition into their lives. And so I really encourage mediators not to stop people from having feeling even sometimes if it gets a little hot in the room, and to allow people to process what's going on for them together and individually, so that when they do come to talking about the terms of the divorce, they're doing it in a clear headed way and not in a way that is actually muddied by unprocessed emotion.
And do you have any additional wisdom for conflict professionals to using this approach to navigate the tension between emotional expression moving towards practical decision making? Because it sounds like that's a bit of an art to work with these
Yeah.
emotions and then get to closing the deal essentially in a way that's productive for both parties.
Yeah, I give people homework for writing down what it is that's going on for them, right? And so they don't always have to process it in the room because writing allows our brains to work in a different way than just talking, to take some private time to work that out and think about what they think is important for themselves, what's important for the other person, and what's important for other people in their lives, like their children or their parents or their communities, their neighbors, their friends, and so on and so forth. Because I think that really does help them. And I think that to talk about the how we're having this conversation, not just the what of the conversation and what the purpose is in a really structured way. I think that in mediation, it's really important, James, for the mediator to create a safe space, what we kind of call a safe container. And that we build this container that allows the people to talk about what they want to and need to talk about in the container, and that we hold that space for them. And what they do with it is really up to them. And so they're going to work through, no one wants to work through the terms of the divorce more than the people themselves. They're really motivated to do that. And when we as mediators try to rush them to it, we kind of rob them of the opportunity to get to it in a way that allows them to really fully participate. And so if we hold that space for them and we're not scared by feelings that come up or scared by a repetitive conversation, that doesn't mean we just accept it. Maybe we reflect back to them, hey, we've had this conversation before. Do you remember that? We talked about it last week, or we talked about it last week and the week before and the week before that. Is there something that we haven't yet resolved that feels stuck that we should talk about so that we don't have to keep having this conversation? And just ask them. They trust that the people, the parties, the spouses, the partners know in some ways their own self what it is that's going on, and ask them to participate with you in creating a mediation process that will work to get them through to a place they want to get to.
Final question I have for you today, Catherine, is what advice would you offer to professionals who want to support divorcing couples in a way that promotes both resolution
Yeah, I
and
think
personal
it's
growth?
to allow the whole person into the room, all the people, the parties and the professionals. And because the idea that we come in as partial people is just not true. As professionals, we come in as personal people, not just professional people, right? And we bring all of our personal experience, our baggage, our talent, our connection, our engagement. And if those people, those professionals are fully in the room as people, then we invite the full parties into the room too. And in that way, I think there's real opportunity for transformation.
This podcast is supported by our CUC Connect members, whose yearly membership includes free attendance to our live monthly webinars, 12 additional featured recordings of past training events, and support from our network of certified trainers for continued professional development. Consider joining CUC Connect today and dive deeper into the understanding-based model.
Well, thank you so much, Catherine, for sharing your experience and perspective with us today. And of course, for all the work you've done with the center. And congratulations again on your new book.
Thank you, James, and thanks for having me.
Catherine's work offers a thoughtful and humane approach to one of life's most difficult transitions and reminds us that even in the midst of separation, there is an opportunity for understanding and growth. Katherine E. Miller is the author of The Emotionally Savvy Divorce, as well as an attorney, mediator, and senior trainer with the Center for Understanding in Conflict. You can learn more about her work and matrimonial mediation training using the understanding based model at understandinginconflict.org.
Thank you to today's guest for being with us today, and to our CUC Connect members whose support enables the Center for Understanding in Conflict to bring new perspectives in the field of conflict resolution and mediation to you, our listener, in each new episode. You can find out more about today's episode, along with full interviews and additional information about conflict resolution and mediation using the understanding-based model at www.understandinginconflict.org.